Hi, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today, I want to talk about photos that have clues that can help us put what we see into a larger context. Here is what I think is a really good example. It is an image of two soldiers who have their arms bandaged, as you can pretty plainly see. What can this photograph tell us about them? Neither man is identified. So, what can we learn from what we see in front of us? I want to start by describing the photograph itself. The size is the carte de visite format, which was wildly popular during the Civil War period in the northern states. We know this because the original is about the size of a modern trading card. You will see, if you look closely, that it is trimmed. The edges of the mount have been trimmed to fit into a photograph album. So we know that at one point it was in a photograph album. I recently did a video about trimmed cartes de visite, so check that out for more information. You'll also notice the remains of two gold borders around the mount surrounding the image. This was a popular motif from about 1862 to roughly 1870. So that's a little bit of what we know about the image itself. If you take a look at the content in the image, you're going to see that these two men have pulled back their coats to show us their injuries. They wanted us to see the injuries. That's probably why they decided to pose for this photograph in the first place. So you will see they have bandaged arms. There's the remains of some sort of stabilizing element to keep the arms steady, resting below their forearms. And then they've got slings, one of a dark material, one of a lighter material. The coats that they're wearing appear to be the classic four-button sack coats, which suggests that we're a little bit later in the war. It's not the formal frock coats with 9 buttons going down the front. This is a more casual jacket from that later period. We can see that there are no chevrons, which means they're not a corporal or a sergeant. There is also no evidence of shoulder straps that you would see worn by an officer. So I think it's a safe bet to say that these were enlisted men, men in the ranks of an infantry company. Also, let's look at what's around them. They are sitting on what appears to be chairs in a studio. The floor with the decorative pattern and the plain wall with the floorboard behind them is fairly common of what you would see in a Civil War period studio photograph. Now, let's take a look at the back of the image. There's a lot of information here to digest. First and foremost, and I'll take it from the top and we'll work our way down. Because this photograph was trimmed to fit in an album, we've lost some of the pencil inscription that's at the top of the photograph. So you'll see appears to be the word Fils, Fils. The rest of it is cut off at the very top. And then what looks like from Switzerland or Switzerland or Switzerland. Fils is a French word for sun, is from Switzerland, the country of Switzerland, very possibly. So we've got that bit of information. Right in the center of the image, we have the imprint of the photographer who took the image. This is common to Civil War period photography in the carte de visite format. The photographer here is Peter Kolbeck with an address of 229 Bowery. That's located in Lower Manhattan. And a little bit of research shows me that the closest military hospital that I could find nearby is the New York Hospital, which was located less than a mile away from Kolbeck's studio. Also of interest is at the bottom left, you can see the revenue stamp. This is a big clue to help us determine the timing of the image. These revenue stamps were mandated by the federal government between August 1864 and August of 1866. They were typically added to the backs of the photograph. So this is a common element that we see here. We also notice that there's a variety of ways that photographers would cancel those stamps to prove that the stamp was no longer valid. And so here we have Peter Kolbeck or one of his assistants using the initials PK to guarantee that the stamp has been spent. And then below that, we have what looks like 15 with a squiggly line of 8, which would be probably the date. This is fairly common to canceled stamps. That could translate to August 15th, 15/8, 8/15, August 15. And then you're looking at 1864, which we don't have a year, but because those stamps were issued between 64 and 66, the two logical candidates are 1864 and 1865. So I'm thinking that we're probably looking more towards August of 1864, because August of 1865, at that point, you're a few months after the surrender at Appomattox and the final endings of the war out west. So these wounded men likely wouldn't have been in the hospital for that long. So I'm going to assume that we're looking at probably 1864. That gets to the possible explanation of what we're seeing here in this image, trying to provide some context around it. What can all those clues tell us about the men pictured here? So here's what I'm thinking. Here's my possible explanation. And again, this is based upon the clues. More research is probably needed, but my current thinking is that what we're looking at here is two immigrant soldiers, possibly with French or Swiss connections, both privates in the Union Army. They posed for this portrait to show us their injuries on or about August 15th of 1864. Possibly they may have been wounded in Ulysses S. Grant's overland campaign in Virginia, which occurred from the spring of 1864 to the summer of 1864. This overland campaign is where Grant, accompanying the Army of the Potomac, commanded by Major General George G. Meade, comes down through northern Virginia into the Richmond area. This eventually settles down after the horrific battles of Cold Harbor, Spotsylvania, all those various movements heading down towards Richmond. It winds up settling into the siege of Petersburg and Richmond that ultimately ends in April of 1865 with that surrender at Appomattox. I think maybe these two men were wounded at some point, either in one of those battles as they moved down towards Richmond, perhaps in the Battle of Richmond in June of 1864, could have also been wounded at some point during the summer of 64, wound up being transported to a regimental aid station and then on to a more formal hospital at one of the supply hubs in Virginia, perhaps Fredericksburg, onto there from from Virginia to Washington, D.C., and then from Washington, D.C. to New York, where they completed their recuperation, felt well enough on a summer's day in 1864 to go over to the local gallery, a nearby gallery of Peter Kolbeck, and pose for this photograph, very possibly sending this image home to their family or to friends to tell them that they were on the road to getting back to 100% health. At some point, they may have been sent back to their regiments to complete their enlistment, Or it is also possible that their enlistment ended that summer and New York, for them, wound up being their final time in uniform. They mustered out and went home to their families. So I should tell you that I ran the faces in this image to Civil War Photo Sleuth, hoping that I might get some hit using the face recognition technology, but there were no examples that were close to it. Work continues to try to find out who these men are. I welcome your ideas. I welcome your thoughts. You can leave comments here or email me at militaryimages@gmail.com. So for now, for today, this is the episode. Take care, and until the next one, happy trails.